Growing up, I was lucky enough to be able to visit Disney World multiple times in my life. We're a pretty big Disney family, and still are. I know it's subtle. Of course, being a kid who went to Disney World and did not live close by to Disney World, I got pretty upset every time we had to leave. So imagine my surprise and delight when I discovered there was a virtual Disney park. Enter Virtual Magic Kingdom, or VMK as it is commonly referred to as, an online world made by Disney that is just a online Disney theme park you can visit from any place in the world. Part 1. History of VMK. VMK launched in May 2005 and left beta in June of that year. Apparently as a promotion for Disneyland's 50th anniversary celebration, also known as the happiest celebration on Earth. Remember that will be important later. Just put a pin in that. It's a joke, get it? This is a pin, yeah. So this era was pretty interesting for Disney and the wider internet because this was at a time where Disney had multiple online games available, both likely to capitalize on the post-World of Warcraft MMO boom and the widespread availability of the internet beginning in the late 90s and early 2000s. This all started with Toontown Online, of course, which launched in 2001. It was a full 3D world where you could make your own toon and meet classic characters like Mickey, Minnie, Donald, and the gang. While also fighting evil robot businessmen known as Cogs, it was basically a turn-based RPG, just with Disney characters. But that was far from the only MMO released at that time. There was Pirates of the Caribbean Online, where you could become a pirate, join a crew, and explore the Caribbean. Pixie Hollow Online, where you could become a fairy of one of 5 towns and explore the world of Pixie Hollow. And World of Cars Online, where you could become a car, race other cars, and engage in a good old round of tractor tipping. And I played all of them, because of course I did. Of course, there was also Club Penguin, which is probably the most similar in gameplay to VMK, though that was not originally developed by Disney. Disney acquired it in 2007. Remember that. This was just an era full of online games marketed towards children. Neopets, Wizard 101, Cartoon Network Fusion Fall, Webkins. So of course Disney was going to try to capitalize on that success. Despite playing all these games though, VMK was the one I spent most of my time playing and was my gateway to these other online games. VMK itself wasn't developed internally by Disney, but rather by Sulak, who are the creators of another online game, Habbo Hotel, which totally shares VMK's DNA in terms of gameplay and interface, but besides that is a completely different game. VMK is very much marketed towards children and all around families. Habbo is definitely meant for teenagers and young adults, though, you can still see the similarities between the two. Part 2. What was VMK? Virtual Magic Kingdom, as its name implies, is a virtual recreation of the standard Disney parks. It's not necessarily based on one specific Disney park, but more of an amalgamation of different parks from around the world. Though it does lean a bit more towards Disneyland, the original, which of course makes sense. Basically, all you do in this game is create an avatar, dress them up however you want, and just explore the Disney park with other players. There's not really much in the way of objectives, though there are some other diversions that we'll get into a little bit later. Like all the Magic Kingdom style parks, VMK was separated into lands. When it first opened, it had Main Street, Fantasyland, and Adventureland. Tomorrowland was added later that year and was later followed by Frontierland. And finally, we got Norland Square in 2007. Besides the actual park areas, guests could also explore guest rooms, which were privately owned by different players. When you first create your avatar, you can pick between 4 different rooms to get for free, though you can get other rooms through other means. Some can only be bought in a shop, while others could only be obtained by doing quests, which is also something we'll touch on a little bit later. We'll circle back to guest rooms in a bit, just hold on that. Put another pin in that. Clearly, as an MMO, or massively multiplayer online game, you could play with other people from around the world. Though since this game was marketed towards children, there were some restrictions that needed to be made. Again, we will touch on that later. I'm really burying the lead here, aren't I? Part 3. So, who was VMK for? By all intents and purposes, VMK was for children, though clearly Disney has a fan base that spans much more than children. But because this was a game intended for children, VMK had something kind of unique for an MMO in that it had mods. Like, that's not like fully out of the box, but like these people were literal paid employees whose job was it to monitor the game for inappropriate behavior, and they actually played the game as well. They were known as cast members, much like how real-life workers of Disney parks are known as cast members. They were identifiable by unique outfits, and their names always started with VMK_. And they also had like a special badge, which is kind of like a permanent pin that was just always on your player profile. There were also hosts who were also employees. They would be identified by host_, and their unique outfit, which kind of resembled the guest relation cast member costume with like the plaid and the blue and red. They also had a special pair of red ears which was only available to them. But because VMK had a paid staff to operate it, it employed a unique feature in that it was not playable all day. It was not playable 24/7. It was only open to guests from 10 a.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is where I played it. And if you tried to log into VMK at any time outside that very specific window, you just could not play it. It's honestly one of the strangest systems I've seen in an MMO. Like, I'm pretty sure none of Disney's other MMOs had that same system, so I don't get it. It was very weird. I mean, I know most kids aren't really up at 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, but that's like, what? 10 p.m. on the West Coast? That's not that late. Part 4. Okay, but what was there even to do in VMK? Like I said, VMK played somewhat similarly to Club Penguin, so if you've played Club Penguin but never played VMK, it's kind of the same gist. When you first start the game, you create an avatar of your choice, and you could choose a pre-selected name or make one up yourself. Though any username created had to be approved by moderators, and so while you waited for that to happen, you would just be giving the title of guest with like an absurdly long number. Like, and I remember like that process could take like a long time, like potentially weeks. Like, maybe I'm just remembering it as longer because I was a kid. I remember having that dumb guest name for like way too long, and I'm like, does it really take that long to moderate a name? Like, is that also not something like you could do on the fly? Like, do you not have a system to like catch that? I know that's like flawed, but at the same time, like, how does it take so long to approve a username? But besides that, you could also change the look of your character and get your own guest room, like I said. And then once you do all that, you're just thrown right into VMK. So as I said, VMK is broken up into different lands, and each land has its own little sub-areas within it. So like Adventureland has areas like the Elephant Bathing Pool and Shrunken Ned's shop. Main Street has the Emporium, also the Sci-Fi Dine-In, which is not a restaurant in any Magic Kingdom park, but rather Disney's Hollywood Studios. I don't know how a drive-in theater relates to the turn-of-the-century Victorian theming of Main Street, but we'll just ignore that, it's fine. And frankly, there isn't a lot to do in these rooms. You move by clicking on a section of the floor, and that's it. Though some rooms did have a little extra features like shops and NPCs, where if you interact with them, you get a certain amount of credits every day. Credits is just basically the currency of this game. But yeah, there really wasn't a lot to do. But because this is a multiplayer game, a big part of the experience is more so interacting with other players. A big way of doing that is by chatting, and thankfully VMK let users type in messages instead of choosing from like a pre-selected list of like 100 words. However, VMK did restrict what could be said in that chat bar, and there was a very limited selection of words you could actually type in. Even some basic words like coming couldn't be typed in, so you had to leave some creative workarounds. Some of them, like, I genuinely don't understand how we could understand what was trying to be said. Like, I don't even think you could say numbers. Like, 3 is tree, 1 is on, 2 is TOO. I don't know why we weren't allowed to say that, but hey, Disney has to protect their family-friendly branding, I guess. And if there is someone in a room that you really connected with, you could become friends with them. And being friends with someone let you see exactly where that person was and allowed you to warp specifically to them. Within reason, of course. Much like other MMOs, VMK had multiple servers, although it was a little unique how VMK did it. So each room basically had its own servers, and if you just select a room, you automatically put in one of the servers. I don't really know how they determine that, But you could also select an option where you specifically pick which server you want to join in that room, which really didn't have a ton of purpose, except one time I specifically remember to celebrate the Year of a Million Dreams Disney promotion, that hosts would randomly pop in different rooms and give you like different prizes, like special clothing, like these like exclusive Mickey ears you could wear. You could also get this exclusive Dream Suite room. Everyone was talking about like where a specific host would be, and that even related to the specific server they were in. Because obviously you can't just pop in every server; you can only pop in one. So everyone was like picking specific servers that they heard a host might be in, and it was just filled with people, and you couldn't even get into some of them. Like you had to like wait to get into a specific area. It was a mess. But besides that, it really didn't have any major bearing on how you played the game. Another interesting thing you could do with other players is trade your items, which is actually a really cool feature for a very basic children's MMO. Basically how it works is one person could offer items they own for an item someone else owns. How it worked is there's a separate window where you went to your inventory and you selected which items you wanted to give. That would bring it to another window, and obviously vice versa for the other person. And because players didn't have to trade an equal amount of items, it kind of created an unofficial value on certain items. Basically, if a player had a rare item like the Seagull Pirate Hat or like the Inferno Magic Pin, that person may think its value is so high that it's worth like multiple different items. The other person could offer double or triple the amount of items to trade for that one item. Frankly, it created this weird atmosphere of what was considered a rare item and kind of a sense of superiority. I have a lot of thoughts on it and experiences I could draw from, but you know, that's too much of a rabbit hole for this video already, which is already very long. And speaking of items, what exactly could you buy in VMK? Well, obviously you could buy clothes, and you could buy separates like hats, shirts, pants, etc., but you could also buy full-on costumes, which went from everything from just basic princess dresses to vampire costumes during the Halloween season, and even Troy Bolton's look from the We're All in This Together sequence from High School Musical, which I of course owned. They also had like a Troy Bolton hair, so you could literally just cosplay as Troy Bolton in this VMK game, which is very funny to me. You could also buy furniture to your guest rooms. You could also buy guest rooms, obviously. I know. We'll actually talk about that in a second. You could also buy pins. They really served no function outside of cosmetic purposes, but they were, you know, you could put them on your player profile and add like an extra layer of customization to the game. But some pins were magic pins. They were basically pins that had a unique in-game animation feature, like one turns you into a snowman, one shot fireworks around you, one turns you into Davy Jones from the Pirates of the Caribbean films, and these were incredibly expensive and rare. Most of them couldn't be obtained normally. Some could be bought, like the snowman one, but those were also very expensive and you could only buy them during specific times of the year. Others, like the car pin, which was so charming, it just gave you a little car you could drive around in, could only be obtained by playing minigames. Some can even be obtained by in-game codes and cereal boxes, like the Davy Jones one. You could buy single-use versions of some magic pins, which were much less expensive, but of course came with the trade-off that they could only be used once. These magic pins, they were so cool, but they also were another thing that was like a status symbol, especially because you could stack multiple of the same pins to increase the duration of the effect. These are some of the most highly sought-out items and were considered so valuable in trades. Like, there was such a cult around these magic pins that like everyone wanted them, especially one like the Dancing Inferno, which basically was not obtainable like after the beta. I guess I should say here that VMK was a completely free game, unlike other Disney MMOs. There was no form of membership or in-game monetization available, though you could buy real-world items that did give you some in-game items, but nothing like game-changing. So I'm sure Disney was losing a lot of money on this thing. I have no way to know for sure. There's no way to know one way or another, but, they totally were losing money on this thing. Like I just mentioned, Disney did utilize real-world items as VMK cross-promotion because, of course, VMK is based on Disney parks, and Disney parks are very popular and highly visited, so there's a little bit of cross-company synergy. One very important item to me was the Pirate Pin Card Collection, which was a blind box item. What it was is you bought a small box that contained 2 pins and 2 VMK trading cards, which had a code for exclusive pirate-themed items you can get in-game, including a hat that was just a pirate hat but had just like a bird laying a nest in it, which, if I recall correctly, was a very rare item. and I got one. It was honestly one of my proudest childhood moments. Here's Pirate Mickey. And here's Donald with a bird on its hat, like in the game. Is my camera gonna focus? There we go. Basically, the big draw of this game was the ability to explore Disney Park-esque area from your own home and talking with other people, though of course there was plenty more to do even outside of the general areas. Part 5. Guest Rooms. I told you we would circle back to the guest rooms. Each guest could have their own guest rooms, which are just rooms that you own. The themes of these rooms were all over the place. There was the Mark Twain riverboat, there was a Tron-themed one, there was even one themed to Epcot, which of course is not a Magic Kingdom park, but it's still a Disney park, so just like, it was a really cool thing. It also played like the Epcot entrance loop, which is one of my favorite Disney park songs, so I loved it. You could essentially do whatever you wanted with these rooms and just decorate them however you wanted. Like, some people made them just into personal private spaces where they could only hang out with friends or just get away from the insanity. Or you could open them up to the public. There was even a whole section of the map that allowed you to search for guest rooms. It showed like the most popular rooms, but also allowed you to like kind of search for more specific things. And like, people got really crazy with these rooms. Like, sometimes they would make their own restaurant where you'd pretend to eat. They could create rides with the dark ride pieces that were sold, but my personal favorite were the games. A lot of guest rooms were used to host various competitions to compete in, and usually the winner would get a prize at the end of each of them. There were a variety of games that could be played, but the most popular were Cuter Boot, Falling Chairs, and Don't Hit the Floor. Don't Hit the Floor involved each contestant on like a column of just generic boxes, and the owner would roll a die to determine what row would lose a box. Obviously, if you hit the ground, you're eliminated, and the last one standing wins. I didn't say all these were fair. Falling Chairs is just literally musical chairs, except that the owner instead just drops chairs from their inventory. And like musical chairs, if you don't get a seat in time, you are eliminated. And finally, Cuter Boot is a dress-up game where the host just gives different themes and the contestants have to dress according to that theme. Some were like more looser, like a specific color or like, you know, like something like fancy, while others were just like dress as your favorite Disney character. And each round, the host picked someone to be eliminated. You could obviously kick people from your rooms, and that was known as booting someone, hence the Cuter Boot. Yeah, it was kind of a brutal game. But yeah, I really love the guest rooms, especially being able to see like the variety of different rooms and to see what each player would do with those rooms. You could also be featured on the front page as a featured guest room, which got you access to VMK's own version of Club 33, which if you don't know is a super exclusive restaurant in Disneyland, like that like costs like $10,000 a year to get in, and like only the elite are able to get in or something like that. I never went there. Part 6. Minigames and more. Of course, considering this is an online game, there were multiple minigames to play. There was a pirates-based one where you engaged in ship combat. The Jungle Cruise one was really cool. You just basically went down the river like all the rooms of Adventureland and just took photo of the animals while doing it. There was a Haunted Mansion ghost hunting game, which was also very fun. And there are also smaller games like the DJ minigame where you could just make and later play your own music. There was also Checkers, which was added in a mini expansion of Main Street. But one of the most substantial and exciting additions to VMK was in Fantasyland, which was the Fantasyland dark ride area. There were only 2 dark rides you could go on, but they were so cool. Basically, in theme park terms, a dark ride is an indoor ride that is dark. Like, it's a very slow moving ride with a lot of show scenes, animatronics, and set pieces. They're my favorite type of ride. Basically, you could ride 2 rides, Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan's Flight, which of course are real-life rides in Disneyland. And these are pretty, like, meaty areas, full of separate rooms filled with different gags and scenes that, like, were triggered every time you went past them. And every time you finished the ride, you were given a magic pin that allowed you the opportunity to pull the sword in the stone, which if you managed to pull it, you were given a prize. The introduction of these rides also coincided with the release of dark ride tracks that could be bought by guests, allowing them to make their own rides as well. Obviously, you could do the Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland ones, but there was also a water park one where you basically rode on a water slide. It was really cool to see what other players were able to create with their own resources. Part 7. Quests. So the quests were my favorite part about VMK by far. Quests are basically like missions you were given, but you could also like do them at your discretion, PC to playing a minigame. And quests could either be really short, like only a few questions, or super substantial. And of course, these quests did net you prizes for completion. They could be guest rooms, new clothes, or even bigger prizes than that. One quest, advertised as VMK's biggest quest ever, literally took hours to finish. I think it was called something like VMK's Hunt for Captain Blackheart's Treasure. At least that's what I put in my outline. It had a huge prize, like almost 100,000 credits, multiple magic pins, and exclusive furniture. I didn't complete it though. But I loved the quest because it really allowed you to engage with the world and kind of do things that you may not necessarily otherwise do in VMK. But also, one of the coolest parts about VMK is that it also did quests that could be done in the real world. Speaking of which, Part 8, In-Park Integration. So yeah, VMK obviously literally based off of Disney parks and apparently was used as a promotion to it according to Disney. And there was a fair bit of real-world integration for VMK. The most substantial being VMK Central on Main Street, which actually allowed you to make a character for the game. And making a character in the park did give you a special badge, which, like I said, is kind of like a permanent pin that's just always on your player profile. There were also in-park quests, like I said, and basically how these worked is that you picked up a brochure and just did little tasks throughout the park. And doing these quests would give you both in-game and real-world prizes. Like there was one to coincide with the opening of the Finding Nemo submarine voyage. That was kind of a unique case, but it's still kind of cool to see Disney use VMK to kind of like celebrate the opening of their big new ride. It was a really cool way to make VMK feel more important and integrated into the larger Disney machine, which, to be fair, very different than it is now. And though I never got to really engage with these quests before they were retired, they did seem really cool and exciting. Sadly, this didn't last forever, and VMK Central even closed, which was kind of a harbinger of things to come. But first, Part 9, the VMK Community. Something kind of notable to VMK is the amount of fan creations based around it that were on the internet. Most notably for me was the YouTube scene. Music videos are the most common ones to my knowledge, but there are also ones with a narrative focus as well. And these videos got views. I'm not going to tell you where you can find them or like what they're even called, but I made quite a few VMK videos back in the day, and like they got like views in the thousands. And it was actually my first brush with video editing, and basically the reason I'm making this video now. You're welcome. There are also tons of fan forums dedicated to VMK, with many theme park specific forums having their own VMK section as well. Like, this was a big deal for many people. VMK is actually what introduced me to theme park forums, though I never really engaged with them that much. It did get me into the overall theme park fandom, which clearly is something I'm still very much into. Of course, not all good things last. Part 10. The end of VMK. By a certain point, VMK was running for a few years. Everyone was happy. Everything just seemed great. People were hanging out, playing games, just having a good time. And then, in April 2008, Disney announced VMK was shutting down that May. It was devastating, honestly. As someone who spent hours in VMK, I wasn't ready to lose something that was that important to me. And to rub salt in the wound even more, new profiles weren't being allowed to be made at that point, meaning that VMK was purposely being cut off before it died. People immediately started questioning Disney about potentially reopening VMK, and numerous petitions were made. And Disney responded to that by saying VMK was made purely as a promotional effort for Disneyland's 50th anniversary in 2005, and its popularity apparently far exceeded what Disney was anticipating. But the game could continue no longer, and so on May 21st, 2008, VMK closed for the last time. And in November of that year, the website was shut off completely, redirecting you to the Disney Games website. VMK was dead, and Disney made it clear there were no intentions of resurrecting it. They instead urged fans to join other Disney online games like Toontown, Club Penguin, Pixie Hollow, but for many, nothing could replace VMK. Part 11. The Search for a New VMK. Of course, as is natural when something like this happens, fans immediately tried to find something else that could replace VMK. Some did migrate to other online games like Club Penguin, but others wanted something that still had that familiar VMK experience. And when they couldn't find it, some people decided to create the experience for themselves. The most prominent VMK successor to me was Virtual Family Kingdom, or VFK. Now, VFK played very similarly to VMK, except with a vague history theme instead of a theme park theme, which obviously is less appealing to me personally. But yeah, you made an avatar, explored the map, talked to NPCs, decorated guest rooms, and played minigames. Like, literally, it was a carbon copy of VMK. But it was not a good game. Like, it was in beta for, like, a long time and had so many glitches. Like it was very common to, like, enter a room and have either your character or other characters, like, not load in for up to a minute from entering the room. Also, it was really ugly, too, with, like, characters looking like this weird Uncanny Valley-esque clay dolls. It was clearly a cheap cash-in to try to court the kids who were sad at BMK closing. It did have some cool features like magic pins that actually transformed you into things like wolves and fairies, and some of these magic pins actually got you into special areas as well that you couldn't otherwise access. And I honestly spent a lot of time playing VFK, though I only did play it for about a year or so before kind of falling off MMOs in general. So full disclosure, I did want to play VFK for this video for research purposes, but that frankly was a struggle in itself. I'm still a little fuzzy on this, but from what I can gather, VFK is now the name of the overall broader company that made the game, and it now produces a bunch of other games. And what was known as VFK is maybe now known as Epic Ages, or at least Epic Ages is the name of the client you have to download to play the game now. Frankly, I don't know, and I spent quite a long time trying to actually piece it together and figure it out, but I just could not. Anyways, I tried to download the client to play VFK, but then my computer sent me this message saying the program wasn't trusted, and so that's the end of that. But based on what I've seen on their website, it is still an active game, so I guess, if you want to, take a look at it, play it for yourself, and just, let me know if you get a virus or something. Hi, it's Aiden. I'm actually editing this right now. I was able to play VFK. That's how I got the footage that is in the video. I played it for like 5 minutes. It just plays the same as I remember it. It apparently is still in beta. It's still ugly. It may even be uglier. And it runs pretty poorly, but it's cool. It's pretty ambitious, but yeah, my computer doesn't seem to have a virus, so go wild with playing it, I guess. Part 12. The Resurrection of VMK. Of course, nostalgia is a powerful thing, especially on the internet, and VMK's closure was so unpopular that of course we're going to get some sort of revival. Obviously, this isn't associated with Disney, but I honestly don't even think current Disney even knows what VMK is. And this I actually got to play, and it's literally VMK, like quite literally the same game. But there are some improvements, both tiny and major. For starters, all clothing items are gender neutral, and that's pretty cool. But outside of that, this game kind of transformed from just a pure recreation of VMK into something bigger than VMK. It's still being actively updated with items that go far beyond what the original VMK even offered. They're even making new areas you can explore. Like there's an entire section based off of the World Showcase section of Epcot. And as of this recording, they are currently working on Animal Kingdom and California Adventure expansions, though each only have one room at the moment. Clearly, this does not have the backing of a major developer, and this is a fan-made thing, so these rooms aren't going to be quite as polished or nice as the normal VMK game. But it's honestly really cool to see the team be so committed to kind of expanding upon what VMK originally was. They're still doing seasonal events and churning out items regularly. Like, this could have been a literal one-to-one creation and just leave it at that. But the fact that it went beyond is really nice to see. And every time I played the game, there has always been people there, so it is nice to see that it does have an active community. And obviously it fits right in with other Disney revivals like Toontown, Pirates of the Caribbean Online, and Club Penguin. In conclusion, so despite the era of VMK only being a little more than 10 years ago, Disney as a company has changed significantly. It was only a year after VMK closed that Disney would buy Marvel, and of course that set a path for the company to become the absolute entertainment powerhouse it is right now. And Disney's online ventures on the whole don't seem like they were major successes. Only shortly after the closure of VMK did we see the closure of literally every other online game made by Disney. I mean, and I'm sure you all know the tragedy of Club Penguin, but that is way too much to get into. Toontown had a pretty good run, and Disney basically made a whole franchise out of Club Penguin with like merch, video games, theme park events, and even TV specials. But even more broadly than that, Disney as a company really just isn't into the video game market at all. Like, it's very clearly not interested in video game development. Once Disney Infinity ended, it basically backed out of video game development altogether. Now Disney is just content to simply license its properties to third parties and just have them deal with it. Which is fine, but it is kind of sad in a way. Although 2000s nostalgia is the thing right now, and while it's currently more generated towards early 2000s, obviously, nostalgia of the mid-2000s is inevitable and rapidly on its way. However, I don't foresee an official Disney-led revival of VMK, especially with like the fan revival doing just fine, and also, why would it? It's the most powerful media entity on the planet. They can't be bothered by that. But VMK was foundational for a lot of people, even being the first MMO for many. I never really got into MMOs after my time with VMK, but I have to imagine other people did. And obviously we're coming off a very hard year, one where among other much more major things, we weren't able to go to theme parks. And VMK is just a cool way to get the theme park experience in your own home, as limited as it may be. But anyways, that was just a quick dive into what VMK was, what it had to offer, and a little bit of its history. It's just an interesting look at a Disney that is very different than it is now. And to be quite honest, maybe it's a good thing Disney isn't making VMK anymore, because, you know, we'd probably have to like pay to go on Peter Pan's flight now.